Welcome to another episode of Clinic Success Secrets, where we're uncovering the strategies and insights that drive medical growth and excellence in patient care and just healthcare in general. Join us as we're diving into expert advice and success stories from healthcare leaders around the world. Today's a bit of a special episode. I have the honor of having Boomer Anderson on today's episode. Boomer is the CEO of Smarter Not Harder Inc. and also one of the innovative minds behind Troscriptions, which again you can tell us all about on our chat today. He's also the head of Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, a nonprofit dedicated to educating healthcare professionals on optimizing health rather than merely treating disease. So forget just getting you to, the bare minimum, actually taking you above and beyond and making sure they're living a legitimately and truly healthy lifestyle. With a very, very broad range in background from finance, having run the South Asia debt capital markets business for a top investment bank, he's now done a complete, pivot and is now a health optimization expert. Boomer has run many TED Talks and also bringing today a really interesting blend of analytical vigor and also cutting edge health education. So listen, before I go much deeper, all I can say is I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And Boomer, it's an absolute to have you here today.
Well, and thank you for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to diving into all kinds of topics. Whenever somebody reads that bio of mine, I realize I've had a little bit of an ADHD career, but there is some commonalities there which we can get into on the show today.
Yeah, as I was doing my research for this podcast, I was just thinking, I don't even know what direction to take with this. We've obviously chatted before, and I think we came up with about 6 or 7 different angles that this could go. So I've absolutely, for the listener, either apologized or welcome. I don't know which this conversation could go anyway.
Well, hopefully it'll be very fun and useful for everybody.
Hopefully, definitely. So Boomer, take us all back. Can you tell us a bit about your background and how you transitioned from where you started off into health optimization, where you're at today?
Sure. And for those of you who just listened to that bio and was like, wow, this is a little bit all over the place, let me give you an insight into the commonality here. I have 3 what I would call secondary interests. The first one was my first love, and that was money. And so money played a huge role in my life, and more so just the fascination with how this world that we live in is obsessed with money and how people make it, don't make it, spend it, that kind of stuff. The second one is an interest in health, and I'll get into that here in a second. The third is an interest in culture. And I call those all my sort of 3 secondary interests because there's a common thread between all of it. And it's an interest in human behavior. So as I said before, my first love was money, and I went into investment banking. But I had this interesting upbringing where my mother was a yoga teacher and my dad was in finance. And so I had that exposure early on that like health can equate to higher levels of performance. Let me give you an example. I don't know, I know your background's in engineering, right? But there's very few people in the world other than mathematicians that love calculus exams. And I remember going into what was a calculus final in college. College is the same as university, just for those international listeners here. But I went into that exam and, I was pretty nervous about it, but I did 3 deep breaths and all of a sudden my physiology changed. And I knew there was something here. So, fast forward there, I get into finance, I then start to play around with this idea of health, or this concept of health that I had in my head, which was basically how to look good naked and follow a diet and do everything and keep my cholesterol low, because that's what people told me what healthy was. Had a few stumbling blocks along the way, ended up pushing the training side too hard, sleeping a lot less than I really needed to. But that job I had at the time sent me around the world. And, I went to 40 countries in 4 years, basically trying to help companies and governments raise money. And again, keeping that whole health theme, I was one of the few people in the world that could calculate what my return on health was. And so it was, this amount of money that I invested in my health would lead to an X amount increase in my bonus at the end of the year. And, that went pretty well. Done everything that I wanted to in finance at the age of 30. And on the way out, I found out I had a heart condition, just as a result of the other elements that get less talked about when it comes to health. And that's stress, sleep, your environment. And again, somebody who goes to 40 countries in 4 years, you can assume that they probably have an issue with biological rhythms. And I didn't really equate to biological rhythms to health. I was purely basing health on what I read in Men's Health, right? And then it became more of a, okay, if I don't do anything differently, I'm going to die. And so I took a step back and relied on the things I was comfortable with, which was just, heavy data, deep analysis into my own physiology. And through that time period, I, like you, started a podcast, started talking about my experience and what I did to myself, which was just heavy analysis. And then I had a few former colleagues say like, hey, can you do this for me? And that kind of sprung out into like a health consulting business. The podcast itself was great because it was a fantastic way to get free consults all around the world. And then, once I had established myself in that podcast, it started to build my network in the health industry. That allowed me to start a couple of companies, one of which is a supplement dispensary in the EU called WellDM. There's now a whole nother team that runs it. And frankly, I handed it over pretty early stages. There's also, and then I got involved in the nonprofit Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, which something I'm truly passionate about is introducing a new framework into our current healthcare system, which is how do we give people a modality to practice health rather than manage disease? And then came Troscriptions, but this has been a long-winded intro into the fact that really all of this was driven by an interest in human behavior. And if you look at human behavior at a macro level, you can observe how humans behave through things like financial markets. At a micro level, it's super helpful to understand that human behavior is often driven by the organisms that make up us. And there's a concept in there called the holobiont. And you start to realize very quickly that, neurotransmitter balances and how our physiology is made up ultimately dictates our behavior rather than we dictate our behavior. So that's probably opening a whole nother can of worms, but I'll leave it with that and we can go in whatever direction you want to.
First of all, the reason I can't stop smiling is as you're saying that, I think I mentioned, yes, my background is engineering, but it was specifically biomedical engineering for the very reasons that you mentioned. And I have a flashback final year. In Ireland, we say college as well. In the UK, they say university, but I remember final year college, I think it was a biomechanics. And like that, I remember freaking out. And I'll never forget it, walking into the disabled toilet and reminding myself, okay, I saw this video about box breathing and doing that for, whatever it was 6 minutes before the exam. And I swear to God, that idea of being able to regulate your nervous system similarly it's just fascinating, and seeing that correlation between mental stress and physical stress. Again, obviously they're the same, it's cortisol and adrenaline either way, but it's just funny seeing those parallels. And then on the topic of unbalanced, rhythms. I'm recording this in Asia. You're in the US, so I mean circadian rhythms out the window. So maybe I should get some health checks. But I think that there's so many ways we can go about this, and I think what I'd love to dive deep into is what you specifically mentioned there, Boomer, is your why. Maybe your background wasn't medical originally, but you made it your passion, and it's legitimately inspiring seeing that you became the serial entrepreneur in this space due to sincere passion in how humans operate, as you said, both on a micro and macro level. Uh, Before we get into that specifically, though, you mentioned you have your nonprofit, and you've obviously had your myriad of other business ventures. You have your profit and you have your nonprofit. Can you tell me a bit about how that dynamic plays out running two startups, as we said before, previous conversation, as if one startup isn't stressful enough? Why did you start two, and how do they complement each other?
Yeah, so this starts to actually get into that conversation around why, right? Because there's this great story that in my previous life I was told by a client of mine. That client was Ralph Lauren, and Ralph Lauren, the company. And there's a story in Ralph Lauren's lore that goes a little something like this. So Ralph Lauren, very successful company, right? Polo Ralph Lauren, you actually have on right now a shirt that was largely designed by him. It might not be his label, but the structure of it was designed by him. A hugely influential company. And as a result of that, Ralph Lauren had major success. And the story goes that his head designer came into his office one day and said, "Ralph, I've had a fantastic time here, but I want to go off and start my own fashion label." And whenever you lose a key employee, it's a hard thing to take, right? Nobody wants to lose a key employee. But the message that I've been told was given to the person was, if you're going to go out and do something, do it different or don't do anything at all. And that person was John Barbados. John Barbados went on to start the brand John Barbados, sold it for 9 figures to a private equity firm later on. And so that message of doing things differently really resonated with me. So I left investment banking, and I met a couple of doctors along the way, Dr. Ted Achacoso and Dr. Scott Schur, who I remember having this conversation with them in London. And we were sitting down and they were talking about what they're trying to build. They were launching a nonprofit and a for-profit at the same time. And the idea there is balance, because the nonprofit has a very long mission, but needs to be funded. And the for-profit needs to support the nonprofit. The business model here is an old one, but it's been sort of bastardized over the years. The name for it is the reciprocity model. There's a give and take. But the way this sort of manifests itself in modern day parlance or milieu is around, mostly companies having a foundation and investing in charity, or maybe they have, sort of dedicated community service time. And that's all good. Like, frankly, giving back is great. But we launched the nonprofit Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. There, what we did is we're actually trying to introduce a new modality or a new practice, new standard in healthcare, because all of us listening to this know that healthcare is basically disease management at this point, or at least, when you're starting to talk about standard healthcare initiatives. Now, the way we teach that is through 7 basic foundations: chronobiology, exposomics, bioenergetics, gut immune system, epigenetics, and clinical metabolomics, and evolutionary medicine. Now, you teach somebody that, And that is usually when you're working with a patient, it takes about 6 to 9 months to kick in, really nutrient and hormone balancing in the most diligent of patients. With Troscriptions, it's really filling that need. So the two support each other. And so let me give you an example here, because if you have a practice and you tell your patients like, hey, you're going to get better in 6 to 9 months, well, they're going to fire you, and they should, right? Because it's a little ridiculous that you would do that. And so they needed something we needed something to support the nonprofit, and that became Troscriptions. And so we created a product line which provides immediate needs now. Now, going back to your original question, launching one business is crazy. Like, entrepreneurship is, I think, very much it's very sensationalized in today's media, right? Like, everybody should become an entrepreneur, and I disagree with that wholeheartedly, because it's not for everybody.
100%.
It's freaking crazy.
Yeah.
Now, launching one business is hard, and by year 5, most businesses have failed or they're dying. If you make it past year 5, there's usually a reasonable success rate. But we launched 2, and so you're a biomedical engineer. You know the probabilities better than I do, but the probabilities of that succeeding were relatively low. But we were giving back our time, and in certain cases our money, right away to the nonprofit, rather than waiting for something in the future to happen. Don't get me wrong, compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world, and I fully support that. But what we're advocating here, and what we're doing differently, going back to the original story, is that you're giving back right away, and you're giving back in form of your time as well. So it's a completely new business model. Well, it's not really a new business model. It's a way of reintroducing an old business model with some insanity, but insanity and genius are quite valenced sometimes. And so I owe it to my mentor, Dr. Ted, who really kind of brought this to me. And, I, of course, love a challenge. And that's really why we started 2 companies at once.
Okay. Lots to unpack there. Okay, so the part of me, and this is first of all, I agree with the whole point about everyone tries to make entrepreneurship out to be a sexy thing. No, you just, once you get really stubborn, you just don't want to stop.
I have a good friend, and so I do health consulting still on the side, just because I enjoy it and I get to pick the clients that I love to work with. And all of them are entrepreneurs, and the reason is because I understand the lifestyle very much. And one of them, they started this very fantastic music brand and doing really well. They raised a bunch of money, and he was telling me the story of it, and he said at one point they were just losing enough money that they had to make it work. And at some point that kicks in, that you just you have to make this work because you want something out there in the world. And we've never actually faced a situation where we're losing money, but it's that kind of drive, that kind of spirit that is really entrepreneurial. You have to see it in the world, and that's what makes you do it. Otherwise, I would say there are better and easier ways to make money.
Yeah, I'd say, just to segue on this, I think it's worth mentioning. I remember when I first got into doing what I do, starting the agency, people say, "Oh, you're so driven. You're up at 5 a.m. working and all this sort of thing." Yeah. I just remember turning to them and saying, "I need to pay rent." It's not discipline; it's me freaking out. It is. It's something that Alex Ramon, he put it aptly. He said the challenge of entrepreneurship is there's a known input, but there's an unknown outcome. There's a known amount of hours you're putting in, and there's that unknown of whether it's going to work. So, it's a testament to your character that you're willing to make that investment. And before I get grief for this, I will completely. I think vast majority of people, it just doesn't suit. If you love doing what you do, example, if you're a doctor, you're literally saving lives daily. That is the most noble thing you could be doing. Uh, you're not being selfish like us, trying to make money on it as well. If you're a teacher, you're educating the next generation. I think just on that note, I think different strokes for different folks, as we say in Ireland. There's pros and cons to everything. But circling back to that point that you're starting both brands at once. You've said obviously the nonprofit input that you're giving is cash and time. In hindsight, do you regret starting both of your profit and your nonprofit at the same time, or do you, if you're to do it again, would you waited a year till you knew that the for-profit business had legs? In hindsight,
The TLDR here is no, I wouldn't do anything differently, because if I were to do it any other way, it wouldn't be different. And what this goes more deeply into the why, right? And by launching a for-profit company, and I'm not saying that this is wrong in any way, but launching a for-profit company first, or even starting the nonprofit first, you don't really complete the whole picture. And what we're at a meta level trying to do is show that there's a different way to do business. And there is a way in which you can make money, you can have fun, and you can really drive impact. And you can do it with this balanced business model. So would it have caused me less stress to have one focus for that time? Sure, but if you actually look at the two businesses, they're very interrelated, and they're very, as a result, balanced, in the sense that one is very much a long-term, we're actually looking to change the healthcare system. The other is very much a short-term, here's the product that we need to get out, we need to sell it, here's how we need to market it, that sort of thing. So when we talk about, one of the things that I gravitated towards was the opportunity to change how people do business. Yes, I want to help the world get healthier and be a healthier place. But at the same time, I do think part of that is going to be driven by the systems that reward people. And if we can change the reward mechanism, if we can change the way people do business, then there's a potential there to both help and contribute to the world at the same time.
I'm going to dive deep into what your two businesses actually do, because I think anyone listening is going to be thinking, okay, sounds great, it's very abstract.
I haven't gotten into the details yet. That's fine.
We haven't gotten to anything. Yeah, so we'll touch on this, and again, I feel like there's going to be a whole series of episodes here. We can nerd out about any of the topics we've discussed before. But what I will say quickly, Boomer, it's just a genuine curiosity, because on my end, a passion of mine is helping men with their mental health. So I want to build effectively the equivalent of a non-profit, a second brand. How do you personally split up your time? What is the time at, like, between these two different businesses? Like, how do you prioritize tasks between the two?
Yeah. So when I was in finance, there used to be somebody who was in human resources who would come over and pitch the idea of work-life balance. And work-life balance is an ideal concept, but in practicality, if you're driven, it's rarely ever going to happen. In fact, balance implies trade-off and a constantly jostling between back and forth of life and work. And I always used to laugh at those people, right? Because, and look, they're just trying to do their job. But I used to laugh at those people because, we'd sit there on the desk and, you have somebody that's working 12 to 18 hours a day. And that seemed kind of trite and almost like a slap in the face whenever they'd come by, or they'd send the email that would say, like, come to this lunchtime meditation or whatever. Hindsight, going to lunchtime meditations is probably a great idea, or going for a lunchtime workout. Yeah, great idea. but I don't necessarily believe in work-life balance. So that's a fundamental thing here, is that I believe in work-life integration, and I have a partner who believes the same thing. And so work-life integration means that rather than me constantly trying to trade off between work and my family and, that kind of stuff, I'm integrating it across the board. And so time management looks a lot different for somebody who practices work-life integration than for somebody who practices work-life balance. Work-life balance is much easier to illustrate. It's the person who goes to work at 9, they leave at 5. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. And there's almost a compartmentalization between work and what I, go and do with my family. The work-life integration component looks a little bit different in the sense that my wife and I every morning go out, walk for coffee, have great conversation. It's not a clear boundary of 9 to 5. There's going to be weekends. In fact, most weekends where I'm doing some sort of work. There's going to be evenings where I do some sort of work. But in the middle of the day, sometimes I might take a break. I might go to the gym. And so the first principle there is work-life integration over work-life balance. Then the time management thing that you just mentioned. So what people would call a typical work week or typical work, what you think of when you think of work, I probably work around 60 hours a week. Now, I'm not saying, again, that that's for everybody. I do balance it out with exercise and a lot of emphasis on my own health. But when it comes to thinking about the mission and really changing this healthcare system, that's a constant back of mind thought. And so, again, integration helps here rather than balance. Then it becomes like, what does the actual time of those 60 hours go to? 90% of it is to those two organizations that we've talked about. It's health optimization, medicine, and practice, probably 95% of it. Health optimization, medicine, and practice, and smarter, not harder. We have projects there, not just Troscriptions, we have artificial intelligence projects there as well. So that's the majority of the time allocation. And then you take the time allocation and you divide into prioritization. And, I'm a great borrower of other people's ideas. And so Gary Keller, who I believe he founded Keller Williams Realty Company, wrote a book called The One Thing. And there I spend quite a lot of time, maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes every morning, identifying what that one thing is and really focusing on that one thing that'll move the needle and trying to cut out everything else. Now, as the CEO of an organization, you have some responsibilities, and those who do this well tell me the pie chart looks a little bit like you're focusing on people, strategy, or revenue, and funding the organization. And so a lot of my time now goes to people because I have to make sure that the organization is set up to win. And so there is some sort of blurred line between that one thing and, people always needing help. And as the CEO's job, you have to solve the unsolvable problems. And so, yeah, time management, it's a constant. I would say it is a struggle. Like, I haven't found anybody in my position who does it particularly well, but I do make time every day for some sort of health activity. Usually that's exercise for me, particularly like weightlifting. And that's sort of a non-negotiable. I do make time for that time with my wife, non-negotiable. And then the boundaries get a little bit blurred, but they're ultimately guided by that one thing and sort of that pie chart of what I need to do in terms of my responsibilities.
It's a very comprehensive, but I think it's a great answer. I think, again, we'll dive into actually what you do, but I think it's, at the end of the day, the balance applies that it's binary, that it's a work is something that you hate. And if you do, if it is, I think you use a key word there that I think is important for anyone that's in your position or anyone that wants to start some sort of business. It's a very cliche term, but mission. If you're just driven by this burning thing where in your case, you want to change how healthcare and business is done. You would probably rather be spending a few hours on a Sunday morning doing it than watching a movie. And I think that's like, and it's also that slippery slope of what actually qualifies as work. I know I have friends who shoot content as part of their job. You know, they travel around the world and do whatever. They're technically working, but they might be videoing something or they might be editing. It's a slippery, you know, it's not that binary when you're driven by a mission. So I think it's a great answer. And I think the one thing I'll definitely be picking up myself. Diving though so your two businesses, right? You got your for-profit venture and your non-profit venture. Can you tell me a bit about Troscriptions, your for-profit venture, and what sets it apart from other health products on the market?
Sure. So Troscriptions, we call ourselves a formula company. And if you look at the overarching mission, or not, it's not really the mission, but like the overarching goal. And these are goals like the nonprofit. If we were to introduce a new specialty within the healthcare system of health optimization, and if we were to accomplish that, and if we were to accomplish our goal with Troscriptions, which is to introduce what we're calling right now a formula company, and to have that generally accepted, I can retire, I can go to New Zealand, and you guys can come visit me on like my farm, right? And that'll be what I do. But the idea behind Troscriptions is to start something that is not quite a pharmaceutical company, but has that level of rigor with how we create our formulas. We're not a dietary supplement company because we all know that's a very lightly regulated industry. And so what we're trying to do is to, the rising tide lifts all boats, right? And so what we're trying to do is to introduce a new standard by which companies formulate. And so Troscriptions were precision dose, physician formulated, and pharmaceutical grade formulas. Those are a lot of words, but let's break that down. Physician formulated. I am an endangered species amongst our staff in that I'm not a medical doctor. We have 5 medical doctors on the team, each of which specializes from emergency medicine to our chief science officer, who is his background's in pharmacology, toxicology, and also he's an interventional neuroradiologist, right? And so we have a wide gamut of backgrounds, and these physicians all needed something that they could use in their practice, that they could trust, and that they could know exactly what's in each formula at any given time. And so with Troscriptions, we say precision dosed. Precision dosed means, again, you know exactly what's in your formula, but also we deliver it in something called a buccal troche. And a buccal troche, we're the first people to commercialize this. It's been used in hospitals for a very long time. It's been used in compounding pharmacies for a very long time, but we're the first people to use it commercially. And what we do with buccal troches is it's a lozenge that sticks in your upper lip between your cheek and your gums. It dissolves in 15 to 30 minutes and presents a very reliable effect with minimal ingredients. Now, that's great, but also the troche is scored so that you can cut it into 4, meaning that you can practice self-titration. Because, Thomas, your dose is going to be different than my dose, right? Or maybe we're the same, but for instance, my dose versus my wife's dose is going to be different. And so a physician needs to be able to titrate their doses rather than relying on capsules and capsule instructions, right? And so, again, that spirit of doing things differently, we do it with our delivery mechanism too. So precision dosed. Pharmaceutical grade, what we mean there is that we're going to the ends of the earth. Like I've been to random places in South Africa to get the highest quality ingredients or to build the best relationships possible so that you can have the highest quality product. Now, why is that? I work with 5 medical doctors. I also have my own health consulting practice. It's health optimization practice. And I need to know that what I'm giving my client is exactly what's on the label, but also is not going to do them harm, right? And so pharmaceutical grade ingredients go through a certain standard. There's a reference standard for them. But we take an additional step and we call it beyond pharmaceutical grade. And beyond pharmaceutical grade means that I'm going to go and source these ingredients, whether it's in the far-flung hills of China or in South Africa, and I'm going to take them and I'm going to get them tested, something called HPLC testing. It's high potency liquid chromatography. You're a biomedical engineer, you know this. And it's able to test for purity and potency. We're also going to test for heavy metals. We're going to test for the presence of microbes. And that's before it goes into any formula. Now, once it's in the formula, we also test the troche itself so that there's a standard across all troches. So the company does things differently, and it starts with really everything I just told you there about precision dose physician formulated pharmaceutical grade. We don't need to do this. In fact, the US dietary supplement regulations and the European dietary supplement regulations are really, really light. And so the idea, again, here is to give you something that's reliable. We spend a ton of money on R&D. We spend a ton of money on testing so that you have a reliable formulation that is delivered in a very interesting and new manner that buccal troche. Flip side of that is that you can end up with a colored tongue. We do that for fun. Like some people, for instance, our first formulations, we were I mentioned the novel delivery mechanism, but we get into novel ingredients too. So the novel ingredients side of it is perhaps something we should spend a moment on. I mentioned that I travel to the far-flung reaches of the earth in order to get these ingredients. That's true. I've been to Bloemfontein in South Africa. We have an alliance with the University of the Free State in South Africa. We have a relationship with a pharmaceutical R&D facility in Maryland. And all of that is to provide you the best quality outcomes. When we formulate, we're not just going to use a vitamin C. In fact, I don't think we will ever come out with the pure vitamin C. There's nothing wrong with that. It contributes to antioxidant production, et cetera. But we want to give you formulas for an effect. And so if you're formulating for stress reduction, you kind of look at what are the prescription medications out there that are very effective, but also have potentially downsides like addiction. And then you kind of look at the mechanisms of action, and then you really start to build a list of what are the non-addictive herbal equivalents that affect those mechanisms of action. And then you end up with a list, and we have a long list for every formula that we come up with. Usually we take the ingredients that are illegal and we either throw them off the list or keep them for ourselves. Just kidding, somewhat. But then we go into, okay, what's most effective, and then what is not cost prohibitive. The reason why we have those relationships in South Africa and that pharmaceutical R&D facility is because what we want is a high quality ingredient, and we also need to do it in a cost effective manner. And so those, facilities will synthesize for us if we need to. So we've introduced something like methylene blue to the commercial market. We've also started to focus a lot on GABA. I know you want to get into that, so we can get into that too. And, we brought compounds like Agarin, B3 GABA to the market. And it's all due to this clinical expertise around those systems in the body that help really affect change.
Yeah, again, there's any amount of angles to go up there. So I'm just trying to process first what you were saying, but I want to dive into the mechanisms first of all. We will do that in a second, but I also would like to roll back again on the fact that you mentioned you're the only non-medical professional, non-doctor, MD, whatever you want to call it, on the team. Inherently with a product-based business like what you have right now, specifically in healthcare, there's a lot of hoops to jump through and all that sort of thing. How did you find the process of actually diving into just when I hear you talk about all these different mechanisms for delivering stuff, all I can think is a headache that must have been required to actually get that up and running and actually approved and checking all these the different ingredients and all this. What's that process look like? Because I know you did health consulting and all that, but and I know you're very well connected. That being said, there must have been a lot of headache involved in actually getting the logistics of a brand new business like this up and running.
Yeah, of course, right? And what I would say is it's an evolution, and we're doing things better than we did yesterday, and we'll continue to do things better. So first off, we have an incredible team, and it starts really with our chief science officer and founder, Dr. Ted, who really reiterates to all of us that we're going to do things differently. And, he instilled in me very early on both the reciprocity model and just, this willingness to do things differently becomes a giant headache too. Because when you do things differently, that means oftentimes they either haven't been done before or you need to discover how to do it. And so, there's the ingredient side, which I think I covered pretty well. There's the manufacturing side, which is more, that's about finding the right people to work with. And so our formulas are manufactured under the supervision of a licensed compounding pharmacist. The reason for that is because compounding pharmacies have experience with buccal troches. So you have to build a relationship there. We use non-THC, so 0% THC cannabinoids in some of our products. That makes your business incrementally more complicated because a lot of places in the world either can't receive those. For example, most of the EU can't do anything other than CBD. Or in Asia, most times even CBD isn't accepted. So you have to become an expert in sort of cannabinoid law, import law, etc., as to what markets you're going to operate in. 90% of our markets in the United States. And, we're expanding in other countries, but we do it through practitioners because, again, we're basically a group of practitioners. And so we want to do it through practitioners. So you set up your operations based on finding your manufacturer, which we identified the types of people we like to work with. We have ingredients and we have relationships to ensure that those ingredients come in high quality forms all around the world. We rigorously test everything. So you have to be aware of the types of testing out there and how you also are aware that the US supplement industry requires very little, if any, testing. So you have that set up. When you introduce cannabinoids, you also have to deal with payment solutions, which are different than everybody else uses. So we can't use Stripe at this point, for example. And then you have to build out an education platform because when you're bringing a product to market that people haven't used the delivery mechanism before or they haven't heard of the ingredient, you have to be willing to do a long slog of education. Tchaikovsky, classical composer, actually, he, in his first piano concerto, he went to somebody, and I forget the guy's name. He's a relatively famous pianist in either Russia or Germany, and said, "Can you play this for me?" And he said it was too hard. And so Tchaikovsky said, "Well, that's great, but I don't believe you, and I'm going to go take it to somewhere else." And so this pianist was sitting there and saying, "Hey, this is too hard, and I don't think it'll work." And so Tchaikovsky worked for 3 years to get to somebody to actually listen to and play it. And it was in Boston. But everybody knows Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1. And later on, that same guy who was supposed to be that first pianist decided that he would play it as well. So you have to do a lot of marketing. You have to roll up your sleeves and tell the same story over and over again to get somebody to use methylene blue. But 3 years later, it's our best-selling product. But also, now we're doing the same thing with GABA. GABA is largely a forgotten neurotransmitter, but we're rolling up our sleeves and we're starting the discussion. And the reason why we're starting those discussions is because they help people. And we know that in an overstimulated world, we all probably have a GABA deficiency. And in a world that, needs help in bioenergetics or mitochondrial health, something like methylene blue can be very helpful today. So setting up that supply chain is probably something I spend time on every single day. But getting all the pieces and ducks in a row, a lot of it starts with education. And, we have a great team in that sense. Dr. Scott runs a lot of our product education and practitioner education. He does a fantastic job educating on those fronts.
Yeah. Again, so many angles. I think I'm conscious of the time of this. We have to keep.
We can always do round 2s, round 5s. This is all good.
Okay, we may end up doing that. But let's just touch on. Okay, first of all, I think that I want to do this justice. I think. Oh, because I want to dive deep into the nonprofit, and I want to dive deep into the great work that you're doing. For example, with psychedelics and therapy and all that sort of thing. Because I think really, really exciting territory. You mentioned, so one thing I'd like to round things up with, before we talk about more about you, is you mentioned GABA receptors. You say it's a forgotten neurotransmitter. Overstimulated. We don't. We joke about ADHD. I think definitely our society definitely is conducive to that. Amongst a myriad of other reasons. GABA. What is the purpose? Obviously, any medical professionals will be aware of it, but why specifically do you feel it is so important?
I think
to address GABA deficiencies.
Sure. So when I say the forgotten neurotransmitter, that's probably a headline, right? But I mean, people should know what gamma aminobutyric acid is. The reason why I say it's a forgotten neurotransmitter is because the ones that get a lot of attention are your serotonins, your dopamines of the world, right? And serotonin works in a pair with dopamine, acetylcholine works in a pair with norepinephrine, and GABA works in a pair with something called glutamate. Glutamate is your body's primary excitatory neurotransmitter. GABA is your primary relaxing neurotransmitter. There's a decarboxylase reaction that happens that leads to the production of GABA. And if you're looking at a world right now where we're constantly on the hook for dopamine, we're constantly being stimulated, and I, as a person, work 60 hours in traditional work sense a week, and I'm constantly thinking about the business, you have this almost abandonment of relaxation. In fact, you're now starting to see this in social media. A lot of people are giving new names or bringing back cultural names for doing nothing. I think in the Netherlands, it's called like Riksen or something like this. I might have pronounced that wrong, and I might actually have the term wrong, but it's like doing nothing has become this luxury, and relaxation has become a luxury. And so what we've built over the years is this clinical level expertise around GABA. We actually just filed a patent for this, but gamma aminobutyric acid, as I mentioned, is synthesized it actually comes through a decarboxylase reaction in the brain with glutamate, vitamin B6, and magnesium becoming GABA. And a lot of people have an issue with winding down at night. And so if we can help them relax, why shouldn't we do it? And what's really unknown about GABA, or what's not talked about a lot, is how to make GABA work better. And we found that way. And what we do is, particularly in TroCalm and TroZ, which TroCalm works for stress, TroZ works for improving sleep, we've introduced this idea, which we know works better, which is combining a GABA agonist, so a molecule that attaches directly to the GABA receptor, with a positive allosteric modulator for the GABA receptor. And it has a sort of multiplier effect in terms of working well. In TroCalm, that GABA agonist is B3 GABA. Now, somebody listening to this might just say, why don't you give people a GABA supplement? Well, a GABA supplement, if it works for you, might be a sign that you have a leaky gut or leaky brain, because the GABA molecule itself is too big to cross the blood-brain barrier. And so what we've done is we've got a molecule that's attached to GABA, vitamin B3, and it helps cross the blood-brain barrier. You add a positive allosteric modulator, in the case of Trocalm, that's pipermethysticum or kava kava, and it allows for, I mean, you're in Asia right now, and kava kava is more of a Pacific Island thing, but it allows for GABA to work better. And so what we've done is we've found that recipe for stress in B3 GABA plus pipermethysticum. And then for sleep, we use it in the form of agrin, and agrin's got a great history of being the reindeer mushroom. But agrin is an extract from the fly agaric mushroom. And I can get in the story about shamans in Russia and Finland, depending on who you talk to. But it's a long app. Yeah. So let's go.
Mushroom, isn't it?
Yeah. So fly agaric mushroom is, if you look at Toad, for instance, in Mario Kart, or you can look at a picture of fly agaric mushroom. Amanita muscaria. Alice in Wonderland might have been psilocybin, but it's fly agaric mushroom is essentially, the story goes, is that the reason why Santa's reindeer fly is that the shamans in Finland or Russia, depending on who you ask, were chewing it, eating it, urinating into a cup, and giving it to their disciples. They drank the urine, and they saw the reindeer start flying. Now, why did the reindeer start flying? Well, fly agaric mushroom, Amanita muscaria, has two active components, agarin and ibotenic acid. We decided to throw out the ibotenic acid and isolate agarin because ibotenic acid is neurotoxic, not great. But agrin itself in low doses is a long-acting GABA agonist. High doses, it might get you high, but that's in combination with ibotenic acid, though, by the way. And so in low doses, it's a 12 to 14-hour half-life, which means that when you go to sleep, you're relaxed. You have that GABA agonist attaching directly to the GABA receptor, and then you have a positive allosteric modulator in the form of hanakyle, which is derived from magnolia bark. And what it does is it produces this multiplier effect of relaxation. And so one of the reasons why we're focused so much on GABA is because GABA has implications for not only stress and sleep, but also pain, and just that ability to wind down. I mean, how many of us struggle to wind down in the evening? I mean, I work with clients, and most of them have some sort of sleep issue, right? Rather than, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with watching a Netflix episode, but rather than binging on Netflix until 3 o'clock in the morning, why don't we give ourselves something to relax? Why don't we actually embrace that off switch? Because in embracing that off switch, you actually make yourself more turned on, more ready to go for the next day. And so we've really decided to focus on GABA as an organization, because really that off switch is the key to being on more frequently and at a better level.
That's a fantastic answer. I think you can't stress enough the importance of being able to easily switch between sympathetic and parasympathetic these days. I think it's, especially as I said, when almost every supplement under the sun is something that is going to get you more focused. I think there's a very, very real place for a healthy, so to speak, way of actually switching off. So I think, listen, there's so many ways I want to go about this, but I said we may do a 2-part, 3-part, or however many parts.
Sure.
If that works for you. But for anyone listening, can people find you?
Probably best to start with our companies. So you can go to Troscriptions.com. If the message around GABA or methylene blue resonates with you, you can try something out there. Homehope.org is the nonprofit. And, myself, you can find me on the socials at BoomerSNH, which is our holding company. And that's where I am across everything. So come say hello. I'm probably most active on LinkedIn, but I'll endeavor to be better elsewhere in the near future.
All right, guys. So until the next time, Boomer, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Cheers.